everybody. Welcome back to the Carrot and the Stick podcast. I am your favorite root vegetable, Garrett, joined here by our favorite pointy object, Keith. Keith, how's it going?
Good, man. How are you today?
Not too bad, not too bad. We were supposed to post an episode last week. We didn't get that for you guys, but here we are this week with a new episode. And we were proud to announce the death of MEV. We've been talking about this for a couple episodes now, about what MEV is and why it's so bad, where people can sandwich your buys and sells and extract value and basically bleed the ecosystem. And that is officially dead as of today until someone comes up with something new, some new strategy. So we'll talk about what exactly happened that caused the death of MEV, which was a very fast reaction time, all things considered, by the way. And then let's talk about subnet drama, specifically around exploitive or creative manipulation of emissions, and what should be done about that as a community. What should we be pushing for in terms of subnets on Bittensor, and what does governance look like? When does the triumvirate step in? When does another party step in? What should be done? It's going to be a good discussion. So let's get started with the MEV thing. Let's get that out of the way first. We've talked about it for a couple episodes now. So what happened? Well, if you guys remember from some previous episodes, there was a capability where people could manipulate priority to sandwich your attack. So you could see a transaction that's happening inside the block. You would somehow get a transaction that takes place before that one and one that takes place immediately after. So essentially within the same block, you can buy the subnet that they're buying and then sell immediately after, take advantage of the price difference, especially if this is a rather large transaction that you're MEVing, and you can extract value that way. So what happened was there is this ability for people to replace transactions. And we talked about this in the last episode, where you would have people that would make a pseudo call, which a pseudo call is like a call made by the government, like by the triumvirate, that kind of supersedes everything. And they would make a pseudo call that would inevitably fail, but they would replace that transaction with a buy or a sell, a stake or an unstake. And so what's interesting here is that the pseudo calls have high priority because they presumably come from pseudo key holders, which there are only 3. But these MEV bots and these MEV attackers, they don't have pseudo keys. So those calls are going to fail. They know they're going to fail. But before they fail, they have a high priority. And so when you replace a transaction with a pseudo transaction, it adopts that high priority. And so what the Open Tensor Foundation did is they updated the nodes that run the Bittensor blockchain to disable the ability to replace a transaction. And when that happened, MEV transactions failed instantly. And we have seen the death of MEV as we know it ever since. So this happened last week. And ever since that change has come about, we have been a MEV-free ecosystem for the most part. So the number one most prevalent strategy for MEV is now no longer possible on Bittensor, and all is well.
Yeah, it's great. It's the door is now open for big traders to come in confidently. Just keep your, wits about you, of course, with all the stuff we talked about previously with your behavioral sort of patterns, and don't lead anybody onto your trail by, being repetitive in the way you're buying alpha. But as long as you kind of do that and dust your tracks a little bit, I think it's open season on alpha now for some of the larger players to move in as much tau as they would like, confident that they won't be immediately extracted from by one of these creative chain entities that are doing this thing.
Yeah. And there was an announcement from Jake, the founder of Bittensor, Const, as you may know him in Discord, saying that he would be staking about, I think it was 20,000 tau into subnets over the course of the next couple months or so. So these are the kinds of investments that can be made with MEV being gone and being completely eradicated. So it's a good point from Keith, though, to keep your wits about you if you are trading is that there can always be a new strategy that comes out. This is crypto. People come up with all kinds of creative ways to get around the system. But from the way we can see it, things are in a pretty good spot right now. And kudos to the team at the Open Tensor Foundation for resolving this so quickly and getting us back on track where we can focus on the things that matter, not just MEV, but actually building on this ecosystem and building high quality subnets. So
I think before we move on, we should pour a little out for everybody that donated Tau over the last 11 months in their efforts to acquire alpha, and then complained about not receiving the alpha that they were supposed to get, and lit a fire under OTF and everybody else who helped sort of plug these holes, and then now everybody benefits from that effort. So
yeah, absolutely, great call out. So let's talk about subnets and what we want to see in the ecosystem in terms of like the quality of the subnet, but not just the quality, but the mission and impact of the subnet. And we'll talk about some games being played on subnets with their emissions and what that means for the ecosystem, and then what should we do about that? Because the world is our oyster here. We as a community have this opportunity where we can um, kind of in union with the Open Tensor Foundation, we can make Bittensor what we want it to be. And so this is kind of a good opportunity for us to talk about as a community what Bittensor should be and how we approach governance, how we approach enforcement of this kind of social contract that we have of what Bittensor means. I think there's an interesting kind of philosophical debate that can be had about Bittensor, where there are those that are of the camp that code is law and everything that is in code, if it can be done technically, then it should be allowed to be done. But then there's also this aspect of kind of social contract, which is we are all part of Bittensor under a common purpose. And that common purpose can be a very large umbrella. It can encompass a lot of things, but there's generally this singular push that we're all kind of united under. And there's this premise that AI innovation can be developed much more robustly, much faster, much cheaper, much better in a decentralized framework, and also much safer in a decentralized framework compared to centralized parties. And Bittensor was kind of always unified under this idea. And underneath that, there's a whole bunch of projects and subnets that can support that mission, whether it's direct or indirect. You have the direct parties like Templar that are training models directly using decentralization, and super cool. You have the indirect, which are the ones providing more infrastructure level support, like Targon comes to mind. And then you have some other subnets that maybe don't have anything directly or indirectly to do with the development of AI, but they're more existing on the edges of that framework, and they're exploring some other sort of missions and that sort of thing. And then there are subnets that aren't really pursuing any particular mission, but they are taking advantage of the emissions that come from the chain. They're taking advantage of this funding mechanism that Bittensor has provided, and they're optimizing that for themselves without necessarily attaching that to any mission at all, whether it's a good or a bad mission. So I think this is a good opportunity for us to talk about what should we do about subnets that are not contributing towards this mission, not contributing towards any mission, um, and how should we go about enforcing that? And to give a little bit of background, it's possible through roundabout ways for subnets to gain effective control over the entire subnet, where they have all the mining slots, all the validator revenue, etc. And they can take advantage of those emissions, and then they can use that position to manipulate cell pressure, which affects tau flow, etc. And that's not the core ethos of Bittensor. That's not productive. That's not producing anything. So the question is what do we want to do about that? So there's a few angles to tackle here. But Keith, I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of kind of that broader perspective of like the mission of Bittensor. What are we really all uniting under? And then also, what do you do about these subnets that are not even attempting to have a mission? They're just there.
Yeah. I think that it's important to frame this conversation in that many people in BitTensor are coming from the world of Bitcoin. So this code is law sort of idea, I think bleeds into the DNA a little bit that way. And that there's this, shining beacon on the hill that is Bitcoin. And we should be striving to allow the technology itself govern as much as possible. Bitcoin, of course, has its own forks and things that have happened in the past, and the block size wars or whatever the stuff was that's been happening. I don't think there's been anything major actually for a while, but anyway, that stuff has kind of bled into BitTensor. So I think that people that are maybe new to cryptocurrency are like, well, yeah, of course there's governance, or of course people have to make decisions around how to specifically address things outside of the code because that's how the world works. But what happens when you're building kind of in technology, everybody sort of strives to make the field of play one that is fair across the board and where sort of pieces can be moved within this kind of rule set and not, artificially nudged out of turn or removed from the board out of turn because, most blockchains sort of have this ability for manual kind of intervention, and BitTensor is no different. So that's how I guess, framing the conversation a little bit there. And that's when I think about like the field of play and I compare, coming into BitTensor to just like being out in the world. It's like if you're intentionally, everyone can see what everybody's doing. That's one of the great things about operating on a blockchain is you could see all of the little extrinsics and transactions and the things that are all the different keys are doing. And maybe you don't know who the people are that are doing all these things, but of course, what they're doing, and there's a record of it, and you can trace all this stuff back. So that's awesome for figuring out like how things happened. Now, like the question that I always come to when I get into one of these discussions is like, well, if I walk out, outside and my neighbor's left his keys in his Porsche or something, like, is it his fault that I get in and drive off with the Porsche? Like, no, in the eyes of the law, that's his car. It doesn't matter if the keys are in there or not, or if the door's open or it's not. I don't own it. So if I jump in the car and drive away with it, I'm still stealing. That's still doing Grand Theft Auto, We're in a situation here where we have a field of play where outside of like within an individual subnet where everything is governed by the subnet owner through the hyperparameters that can be adjusted within the subnet and the code that's being run by the validators. And you're trying to, if you're doing everything, with kind of good faith, you're trying to build this little like microcosm of BitTensor where you're attempting to generate an intelligence commodity and you create your little rule sets. And that's something where, your subnet owner kind of has almost like complete authority and control over what they're building. But outside of that, in order to make all of that work, you have all of these individual subnets competing against one another on a larger stage. And that's kind of what we're talking about here is the rules that exist for governing how validators interact and rate miners and then how emissions are distributed, not only within this individual subnet to those validators, but also within the subnets in general. And it's all nested. And as you get down to the, nitty gritty level, the subnet owners themselves have a lot of control. But when you get up to the sort of the chain level of where everyone's competing against one another, that's where the code is law thing starts to really like, get, I guess, like solidified into how people expect the thing works, because nobody expects an individual subnet to like, yeah, but the code said this, so you can't change it. Well, then the owner just changes the code the next day, and then the whole thing is just a evolving entity, and that's what you want when you invest into a subnet. There's this kind of idea that like, well, when I invest into BitTensor, I want to know that it's not going to change, because that's what people have thought about like creating value when they're investing in other projects. But the beauty of this project is that it is changing. It will change. And it continues to evolve at a pace and in a direction. Going back to the MEV thing, that's how we solved that so quickly, is that because you can make these changes, because we're still willing to sort of operate outside of this like, yeah, but the code says it's okay, so we got to let them do it. sort of mentality. So now bringing it all back around to what do we do when we have a subnet where we can see that the owner has manipulated the field of play within that subnet to prevent anyone else from operating effectively, whether that be a miner or a validator. And I would go back to my analogy with the Grand Theft Auto. Like, unless this person can explain that their actions are being done in good faith towards some goal, I am always under the assumption that the like their goal is, of course, to get more emissions and just like concentrate that value on their own keys. But what we get to benefit from is the evolution of Bittensor itself, because these, call it black hats or gray, however you want to describe these individuals that are testing the fences in Bittensor and sometimes find some weaknesses and then exploit that. That's an opportunity for us to improve the code itself. And you might have to then, when you notice one of these things happen, institute some governmental action to manually, I think, cut that stuff off at the knees, and then you go in and you fix the code afterwards so it can't be done again. If the person that was manipulating their subnet to gain emissions or whatever had some sort of argument that what they're doing is legitimate, and then people could be convinced of that, that would be a completely different story. But I'm not seeing any creation of value other than the opportunity to shut the thing down and then fix it. Like, that's the value of it, really. And it's okay that they get a little emission. Like, that's what's been happening in Bittensor at the subnet level since we began, and even at the chain level. People exploit things in order to make money, and then the things get better, and then they find different ways, and there's less exploits, and the whole thing becomes, more and more solidified, and the foundation becomes impenetrable, and you just keep building this thing up. And that's what we've been doing for years on Bittensor. There's no reason to stop that now. And just because we're in this situation where it's like, yeah, but they own the subnet slot. Yeah, but you can see that they're trying to screw everybody. So that's what it comes down to for me. Like, if there was an argument in the other direction, I could be convinced, but that's where I land on it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the need for some sort of human-based intervention is there, because you can always create rules around things. And I think that DTAO even like operates off this premise that, the market will be the ultimate government, but the market isn't always exposed to everything that's going on. And also, when you have a subnet owner that has completely manipulated a subnet, or he controls all of the alpha in that subnet and is able to manipulate tau flow, then that will affect the other subnets, because it affects emissions, which affects liquidity in other subnets. So the market could have almost no input in that rogue subnet and still be affected by the rogue subnet. And this is where some governing body stepping in starts to make sense. The question, I think, is, what is the line that you draw for that? Because I do think there's some differences in the community about where that line should be applied. Like, if you could very confidently say that something was illegal, I think everyone would agree that that subnet shouldn't exist. I think there might even be some stragglers that would say it should still exist, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, that we have unanimous consent that if something is illegal, then it shouldn't exist and should be deleted. But there's also a question of how do you know it's illegal? What jurisdictions are you talking about, et cetera, et cetera? You have this kind of open ecosystem of Bittensor that's not really landing on one particular jurisdiction. So, what is legal and what is illegal? So that's another question. But then there's also content that may not be illegal, but is harmful. So this is like the emissions manipulation and whatnot. You may not be focusing your subnet on human trafficking, but you might be bleeding emissions from the system, bleeding tau from the system that is hurting everybody else, and you're not providing any value. And so that's a subnet that is just a leech on the system. And is that something we should be tolerating? And then there's also subnets that might be legitimately intending to do something uh, honestly, but their mission isn't really in line with the Bittensor ethos, nor is it in line with what people really want to see. I just think about all these crypto projects and, financial tools that people are making. Some of those could be completely legitimate in nature, but is that what we want to see on Bittensor? There's no tie directly into infrastructure and AI and anything related to, like, if there's no tie to AI whatsoever, do we want to see that on Bittensor, or do we want to see that somewhere else? Because I think there are some differing views here. Some people will say if it's not AI, it's not Bittensor, and there are some people who will say Bittensor is more of a framework for the future of work than it is about having an attachment to AI, and so therefore everything that is legitimate work should be allowed. And I can kind of sympathize with that in some form or fashion. I think that we need to have a social contract about, hey, if you're a part of Bittensor, what is it that we're kind of collectively driving towards? Because if you open up too wide, then it's like, think of Bittensor itself like a startup company. If you open up too wide, you go after every market possible, the odds of success are going to be pretty low. But if you unite under a more focused market, then you have a real shot at making something big happen. And we're seeing that here with the subnets. We're seeing subnets that will contribute their own piece of the puzzle in this campaign for AI. And it's super cool. You've got, Affine, you've got Templar, you've got Ridges, you've got Shoots. I mean, the list goes on. Everyone participating in their own way, working together, splicing each other together on this campaign. That creates a kind of social understanding of why we're here, at Bittensor. And is that something we should enforce? Like, what if someone comes along and they don't care about AI? They're just here for some other reason, but Bittensor was the right protocol for them, and so they're here. Is that something that we say, hey man, rock on, it's permissionless, that's great? Or is it that we say, hey, be careful, because if it starts to impact or damage our ability to win at AI, then that may not be something that we want here. Um, I think that's actually something that a lot of people are a little bit on the fence about. Some people have very strong opinions, but yeah, I mean, I think that an underlying kind of goal towards AI is important for Bittensor. I don't think that it has to be that ultimately. I don't think that the protocol can only be used for AI. But I think there needs to be kind of like, if you were to average out all the subnets, there should be a general theme that they come across. And I think that's a difficult balance to strike, because you are trying to be permissionless and anonymous. And you're trying to be this open platform where you don't have to apply to get in. But at the same time, if people are building things that are not productive, they're irrelevant, or even damaging to the people who are trying to build good things, where do you draw that line? So I think there is a line. I don't know exactly where to draw it. I think illegal content's obvious. I think exploitative content is also obvious. But what about the content that is maybe honest but counterproductive?
Yeah, that's the stuff that I expect to, the honest but counterproductive, I expect that to be solved by the market. As long as the subnet has opened itself up to participation by every entity involved in Bittensor, like the validators or open mining, or I mean, I guess we're not going to name the example we're talking about, but essentially the problem here is that they've shut the doors on the whole thing. So we don't even know what this subnet is building. We just know that it's being manipulated in a way that everyone can see is not in the way that we expect subnets to be run. So outside of that, though, of course, there are subnets like the marketing subnets that we have, for example. I mean, 93 is a great example, right? That, these guys have built something that doesn't really have anything to do with artificial intelligence specifically, and you can open up a brief with Bitcast that doesn't have anything to do with Bittensor at all. Like, I think BitGet just aligned with them, right? Is like one of their customers, basically, that's using that. And there's no AI involved, as far as I know. So but that helps all of us, because we all need marketing within Bittensor. So we want to be able to rally the troops and all of the different creators and influencers out there, and use a tool like, or use a subnet like 93 to be able to light a fire under these guys. And if we put some emissions towards that, okay, the market's going to decide like what percent of Bittensor's emissions should be going towards the marketing arm, if that's what this is, the decentralized one of the marketing arms that exist. And there's some other subnets as well that are attempting to do something like this. Um, I don't really have a problem with that. If it's non artificial intelligence related and non sort of BitTensor subnet boosting, um, then I don't expect it to get too much traction with the people that are involved in BitTensor, because if you take a look around, everyone that's kind of like interested is interested in artificial intelligence. So it should be sort of like self-correcting is what I would expect. I do think though that there is an opportunity with BitTensor to take the the subnet model well beyond artificial intelligence, like you said, and whether it's a this like Mark Jeffrey actually described it very well in a kind of the state of Tao thing that he released recently through his project, and he kind of described it as like programmable mining. And that's how I kind of look at it at this point. And yes, that programmable mining lends itself very well to many different AI applications. And if you look at the top 20 subnets, we're super AI heavy, which is good. And it makes sense for us to combine forces and push all in the same direction, like you said, so we can penetrate some of these markets and get traction and visibility with some of the larger players investment wise by having this large cohort of artificial intelligence under the Bittensor umbrella. But I'm sure there's going to be subnets that are very successful in the coming years outside of artificial intelligence on Bittensor that still lean very heavily on like the programmable mining and use technology to generate an intelligence commodity of value, although it may not be one that necessarily improves or fast tracks artificial intelligence, research or innovation or whatever. So yeah, that's where I
Yeah,
land on it.
I think I agree. I mean, my perception is that as a protocol, the mechanics of a subnet can be directed towards any unit of work. The question is that uh, what is the kind of cultural push that Bittensor specifically is pushing towards? Um, I think that like a startup, like you think of a common tactic with startups is they'll go after a niche. Once they've conquered the niche, they'll go after the adjacent niche, and after they conquer that, then they go wider and wider, and then they become one of the big companies in the space. And I think Bittensor can have a similar approach where it's like, hey, let's do something really powerful with AI, and let's find the adjacent technologies that we can improve outside of that. I think we're starting to see that already, and then we start to kind of balloon out from there, where Bittensor can become bigger than the AI push. But without that initial focus on AI, it's going to be really difficult to get traction because you're betting on, you know, that one of the subnets will take off. Whereas when we're collaborating together on this push for AI, you're not betting on one subnet. You're betting on a whole bunch of subnets in concert with each other. We're seeing subnets working together today, and they're stringing together all their different pieces of the puzzle. And so when you say, hey, I think that Bittensor is going to produce a flagship model that'll beat everyone else's, or they're going to produce a service that is going to be cheaper, faster, more accurate, et cetera, than other solutions, you can make that bet without expecting it to come from a single individual or a single party. But when Bittensor goes after everything in the known universe, then it's much harder to have that kind of unified goal. So I do think the focus on AI is important. I do think that the recipe of Bittensor is expandable beyond AI. And I think that it will go beyond AI once we get that kind of dominance in the AI field, which is a big field. There's a lot to cover there. We're nowhere near done. We're just now starting to get a little bit of attention. I mean, this is the very early days of Bittensor's true impact in AI. So it'll be a while before we start applying Bittensor to like agriculture and stuff. But it'll come. I think the protocol is ready for that. It just needs to focus as a culture on one thing as a general trend, not in every specific case, but as a general trend. Like the marketing example, it's like, well, yeah, marketing can be used to the benefit of other subnets. It can be used to the benefit of the AI mission. So that's something that has some sort of a tie-in. But when you talk about um, people that want to use Bittensor to do the same kind of crypto, um, the crypto tricks and tools and whatnot that they've been doing and building on every other blockchain, then it starts to, I think, dilute and water down what Bittensor is and what it means. And this starts to also affect the public perception of Bittensor too. Is I would like Bittensor to be perceived as, oh, this is this juggernaut engine that is responsible for major innovations that you could point to. Like, oh, that big impactful thing in industry that came out of Bittensor. And that's what Bittensor's perception should be. And so when we see like, Templar getting shouted out by prominent members in the tech community, like, okay, that's great. That is the reputation of Bittensor that we want to push forward. What we don't want to do is have a bunch of meme coins, meme projects, not as serious crypto projects that sprout out of Bittensor as well, and then that kind of water down both the cultural cohesion and also the public perception of Bittensor. And is that something we should be enforcing, or is that just something we're going to let play out and let the market decide? I think that's a big question. I think that's the premise of DTAO, is that the market is the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner. I think that's correct in some cases, but there are some cases where manual intervention is needed. And as far as where we draw that line is difficult to say. I mean, right now we don't have that line established for the exploitative subnets, the subnets that are trying to squeeze out emissions that do not have a valuable mission, nor are they honestly trying to have a valuable mission. Right now, we've entrusted the validators to have some level of enforcement with minor burn, which we've talked about before in this podcast. Like they refer to themselves as the burn police, and they'll burn minor incentives to try to motivate that subnet to improve. But when you have a subnet that's completely conquered every domain of their subnet, they have all the UIDs, they have all the minor slots and the validator slots, and they're taking all of the alpha in that subnet. The validators are left helpless, and the only thing left to do is to either let it play out or to manually intervene.
Yeah. I wanted to touch on a few of your points here. One thing on the agriculture, I think Score is doing something with agriculture, right? Aren't they looking at they're taking like a picture essentially of produce coming out of some company in Africa that's growing this stuff, and then doing some kind of assessment of either if it's ripe or if it's rotten or whatever the quality assessment is. There's something there. I don't remember the details. I scrolled through it a week or two ago, but we are making our way into agriculture, I think, already. If we have a lot of subnets that we don't really like, and I'd argue we have a couple dozen at this point that I'm not a huge fan of. Maybe other people are. This is an argument for me to leave it at 128 max for longer, because the longer you leave it, the more the herd is sort of purified through that mechanism. And then if you increase the 256, you're going to have a lot of hangers on, probably like 50, 60, 100, I don't know at that point, of subnets that were like, well, what do they do? I don't know. No one really takes the time to figure out, but they have some emissions. They're doing something enough to not die. So, but I think in my mind, if we want to go that route of like really trying to sharpen the focus into artificial intelligence, the longer we leave it at 128, the more we'll get that focus dialed in on the subnets that really deliver on whatever we want the promise of Bittensor to be. So that's one option there. Yeah, and I hear what you're saying too about the takeover of a subnet, and that's when I think we just have to get involved from a government perspective. There's plenty of ways to like manipulate your subnet that are legal and everyone sort of agrees are fine. Like you can create some novel alphanomics that have like lockups for miners, or some sort of like system where they have to sort of earn the trust and get to these different levels where they're earning more over time by showing whatever, consistent performance, or you've got the ability for owners with deep pockets to maybe manipulate the tau flow and emissions by buying and putting their own tau into their own subnet. People kind of see that happening, but you can't really complain about that because that's not necessarily manipulative. It's more of just like using the structure around you in a way that everybody would sort of understand if you explained everything that you're doing to them, why you're doing it, how you're doing it. It's not necessarily underhanded. There's no like, things you're exploiting necessarily on the chain to make what you're doing be more impactful. You're dialing in the tau flow more than other subnet owners so that you're sort of like feeding the fire at the exact opportune time to keep that flow what it is. But or like another good example would be OTC deals or something. It's like, well, I can't find anybody to put money into my subnet, so I have to sell my token, and that hurts my tau flow. It's like, well, why can't you find anybody to put money into your subnet? There's OTC deals happening every day or, multiple times per week for sure. So obviously other people are able to come up with ideas to generate enough interest or confidence in what they're building to have an OTC deal. If you don't have the ability to get one of those, an OTC deal, for anybody that doesn't know what that is, it's basically just a over the counter. So what you're doing is via chat or whatever, you're contacting a subnet owner saying, I'll buy, 10,000 alpha tokens at maybe the current price or a small discount or whatever, and then I'll agree not to sell for a period of time. And then that owner doesn't have to sell those 10,000 alpha tokens. They just transfer them to the other party. The other party sends tau and everybody's happy and tau flow isn't impacted, right? But is that manipulation of your subnet? Like, shouldn't you have to sell it and then, let the market do its thing? So, and subnet owners then that really want to like take that to the ultimate level can disable, right, the alpha transfers on their subnet. So one of the cool things about Bittensor is like, as a subnet owner, you have the ability to send all of the signals that you want out there and then highlight it. You could even like have a whole tactic around that, right? Like, we've disabled alpha transfer on our subnet. We want this to be the purest market mechanism on Bittensor, blah, blah, blah. Nobody's done that yet, but I actually tried to transfer alpha out of a subnet the other day and realized it was shut down. And I was like, I forgot about this. I thought everyone had it on. I don't know what, I haven't looked to see like who actually shut it off, but there are subnets that don't allow you to transfer their alpha. Anyway, the point is that like, whether it's through alphanomics or OTC deals or pumping up your own subnet or any other variety of different ways that you can sort of, quote, manipulate the flow of emissions into your subnet, if the community in general sees the aggregate and the intent of these actions as manipulative or deceiving or taking advantage of a vulnerability of anything on the chain that is exposed or whatever, an opportunity for an exploit, then don't be surprised when your shit gets shut down, because it's still about the people here. Like, if you look at all the top subnets, it's about the people. It's about the personalities that are leading these subnets that bring the confidence into what they're building. And those people are the leaders of Bittensor. We already did an episode about that'll be even more solidified over this year and the coming years as we build out a reliable and, government structure that we can execute these changes around. But it's these people in the end that are going to be the ones that are going to have to make these decisions. And that's why they're the top subnet owners. That's why they're the top, validators, is because they've proven themselves as good stewards to Bittensor and they're able to make these decisions. So, like, yeah, I don't think anyone should be surprised that if you're doing manipulative things that you're going to get called out and you might have your subnet disappear.
Well, I think you're bringing up a good point, though, is that at the end of the day, Bittensor is thought of as like this code protocol, but it really is the people that you're investing in. When you're investing into a subnet, you are investing in the people that are running the subnet. You're investing in the miners. You're investing in the output of that subnet. And so it's a very social environment, actually. Like, the ecosystem is very alive and there's always something happening, which makes it very interesting to keep tabs with. But there's always stuff that's happening, and it's because there's these people that are so involved in the project. And so I think there's an interesting kind of
It
lens
makes
that
it
people are
fun.
taking.
Personalities
Yeah,
make stuff fun. That's
yeah,
why our podcast is interesting to listen to, because you're the carrot, I'm the stick. You're gonna, provide some balance here, and I'm just gonna try and poke you, and whatever it is, like, and that's all of Bittensor. Like when people are doing their little things on Twitter or whatever for a half hour and having their little weekly powwows, and then other people are announcing stuff with videos, and then you got all kinds of different like little marketing schemes. You're meeting people in real life. People are doing like, traveling all over the world, banging the drum for Bittensor. I just saw that Const was in, China recently. So like, that's what, sorry to interrupt you on this, but like,
yeah,
that's why we're here, because it's fun. There's a
yeah.
million things to invest in where you don't know who the shadowy organization, maybe there's a CEO or whatever, but you don't know any of the people in the organization. You're just investing in these companies that are doing whatever shady shit they're doing to make money. Like, that's not why we're here. There's a million places to put your money. Bittensor gives you a place where you can meet all of these people that are building all these awesome tools using artificial intelligence as like the rocket booster. And it's going to pay dividends for all of us if we keep that DNA. The second this thing becomes like, it's the code, we don't know who anybody is, the top subnets, the owners are all anonymous. It's like all of the flavor leaves the milkshake, and it just becomes like Soylent, the thing that like
Mhm.
you know what Soylent is? You can buy these like tasteless sort of like nutritional and I'm drawing a parallel here between, like, you can go make money anywhere really, if you know what you're doing in the niche that you're operating in, right? Whether it's like commodity, you could go just buy and sell corn every day. There's thousands of people that do this. They don't know anybody in the corn industry, but they just like, they got whatever, the chart dialed in so well that they can take advantage of small things and move a lot of money around. Bittensor's not like that. It's way more fun to know the people and to meet the people and to joke around with them and to get onto the podcasts and to do the weekly stuff with everybody and hear people speak and see them and go to the events and everything. We got to keep that. And I think that's what really sets us apart, honestly, from some of the other like AI investments out there that are available for people.
Yeah, you're totally right, and I think that's the like what people are using as a way to gauge trust in the ecosystem is that like you might see, person A doing something and person B doing the exact same thing, and your determination of whether or not that is exploitative might depend on your opinion of those two people. Because you might see like an OTC deal, and you're like, okay, if I see John Durbin doing that, which I'm not saying that it happened or anything, but if I'm seeing John Durbin doing that, I might have one opinion. If I'm seeing anonymous user 5XCW doing that, then I might have a different opinion. Um, and is OTC a good thing? Is an over the counter deal a good thing for the ecosystem? Like, well, I think it can be. I think that it's a good tool in the tool shed, and I think that uh, like when you're trusting people, when the ecosystem is really about the people, then you can understand and start to sympathize and empathize with people that say like, hey, I want to be successful with my subnet, and I feel like the best way to do that is to use this mechanism that may not have been the intended purpose of the mechanism, but I'm going to do it this way to get ahead. And we might call that an exploit. But is that actually exploitative behavior? I think a lot of people would say no, because they're trusting that person. They're investing in that person. Whereas you have some random person that nobody knows, or maybe it's someone that has a bad reputation, and they start to also do things that are kind of exploiting the chain, that are kind of using mechanisms on chain for a purpose other than what they are intended for. Then you start to look at that and you think, oh, that's nefarious, or that's not right, or that's suctioning people's tau out of their wallets. And that really starts to drive our opinion, which drives governance, and it drives the social contract. Like, who are you trusting and why do you trust them? Do you trust them because they're a great person, or do you trust them because they're driven towards the same goal that you're driven towards? And you know that, hey, I don't know this person personally, but I know that they're driven based on everything that I've seen from them, based on their behavior, based on everything that everyone else says about them. I know that this person is driven towards a goal and they're going to never stop until they achieve it. That's the kind of subnet owner you want to invest in. If you have that kind of conviction with somebody, that's who you want to be investing in.
Yeah, and it's also the great equalizer in Bittensor, because like you might not know all the tech. I know nobody knows really outside of the subnet owner and the team within it, and maybe some of the miners, what each individual subnet is doing at like the code level, what's happening every day with the intelligence commodity, the quality of the mine, all the stuff. You're never going to know it all. But you can know, like you can meet somebody, hear them speak, spend an hour or two listening to them on a pod or whatever, meet them at whatever event. And if you're a human being and you've spent 30, 40, 20, I don't know however many years you are, learning how people operate and building this ability to, sort of assess if that person is a worthy steward of your capital, then you get to make that decision, and then you don't have to know. Like, that's what I rely on, really. Like, a little bit of technical stuff, but believe me, not nearly as much as you, of course. So, like, I'm limited in what I can even use, what I have at my disposal for evaluating a subnet, and many are even more limited than I am. But what they can do is just listen to the person speak, and like then you can look at them, see if they're delivering on their roadmap or whatever. Like, look at some of these like um intangibles that then would make you believe that that's someone that's going to do right by you, or really attempt to the best of their ability to complete the objective of their subnet. And then you can put your money behind them and feel good about it, and it not be based on somebody else's. It's all firsthand information then, right? You're not dealing with somebody else's like recommendation or swapping based off something you saw on Twitter that all the price is going to go up or something stupid like that. And that's what I really think will keep Bittensor in this sort of like garage band mentality that we are still at that stage, and I think we'll continue to stay there. Also, like with things like Tau.app or the Tau.com app, creating the ability like through the subnet pages to digest the media coming out of these subnets, and subnets can also like cater that stuff. So and design it specifically to give people some insight into who they are, what they're building, and then make it like fun to buy into this stuff, because like it's not fun to go swap dollars for MSFT. Like that sucks. You're having to look at like quarterly reports and prospectus, whatever. Like that's not a fun way to spend your money, really, and try to make some money. It's much more fun to get to know people and then back them.
I think that what you're touching on is there's a difference between investing in a public stock market and investing in Bittensor. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, I can buy alpha just like I can buy stocks. Therefore, it's like the same thing. And it's like, well, it kind of is mechanically, but the difference is that I can go look at some data about Microsoft and look at some trends and everything. I don't have to know very much about the individual human beings that are operating Microsoft to know whether or not that's a decent investment or not. But when you're investing in an early stage startup, the founder means everything, because the founder is going to be the one who's never going to sleep. The founder is going to be the one who is going to spend all day and night making sure that it's going to work, and they're going to pivot when they need to pivot, and they're going to be dedicated to the mission. And that's the same kind of attitude that you want your subnet owners to have, because guess what? A subnet is an early stage startup. It's a pre-public company. It feels like it's a public company because you can trade it today, but that's just one of the joys of Bittensor. And that's why it's been, one of my favorite features in the Tau.com app is the ability to see the human beings that are behind the subnet. Because you can go look on chain and you can see all these, wallet numbers and things like that, and addresses and stuff. And that's fine and dandy, and you can trace all that. And if you're into crypto stuff, then, that's very useful. But for people that are just trying to make a decent investment into a business or a mission that they care about or believe in, knowing the people, the human beings behind the project is so important. And so don't just look at the GitHub releases for that subnet. Look at the founders, the owners, etc., and look at what they're posting on Twitter. What are they posting on social media? And track that and develop a conviction in the human beings. And so this starts to answer that question of like, well, where do you draw the line And maybe it actually blurs the question a little bit more. Is where do you draw that line of what is exploitative, what is not? When does governance step in? It's like, well, what might be justified for one person might not be justified for somebody else. Um, and so maybe we just draw the line at a much lower bar where it's like, okay, well, um, you know, if it's debatable about whether or not this subnet is valuable, then maybe we just leave our hands out of it and let the market decide. And that kind of goes back to your original point, Keith, of like, hey, after a certain point, the market should be the decider of the winners and losers. And governance should step in for things that are obviously exploitative, obviously not market driven, obviously illegal, or anything like that. And then the rest of it should just be up to the investors. And I think that's a pretty safe take. I think it's you might get some false positives, false negatives here and there, but at the end of the day, I think that that's a decent standard to have. Is that, hey, if something is obviously, and when I say obvious, I mean that's kind of a loose take. Like what's obvious to someone who's good at chain analysis might not be obvious to someone who's not. But for the technical community here, when you see obvious manipulation of subnet emissions for no intended purpose, but just to gain emissions, with no mission, there's no known founder, it's just all anonymous. That can be a good cause for governance to step in and say, hey, this is actually hurting the ecosystem. But for the subnets that are honestly trying to do something, and it's more of about, do you like that person or not? Do you believe that person or not? Then that could be something where we can say, hey, we're going to let the market decide, which the market is the ultimate form of democracy. And that's where everyone gets to vote. And the amount of votes you get is based on the amount of money you put in. So that's what I think why I think the market is a desirable judge of subnets if we can get to that point. But there are definitely cases where I feel like the market doesn't always know about what's going on within a subnet. And those are the cases when governance should step in. Is like, hey, there's an exploit that's happening. It's obviously not towards any mission or anything. It's not contestable. The market may not know about it because it takes a technical deep dive to understand it, but this is what's happening. And that needs to be kind of brought forth.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing, as now we're nearing 1 year in dynamic tau, the assessment of these subnets by the tau holding community, the investors and the subnets, is growing in its like maturity, and the subnets that are being pushed to the top of the list are like, if you look at maybe the top 20 subnets from 6 months ago, it's a very different list than today. And a lot of those subnets were around then as well. So you're seeing like a maturity of the investment group that holds tau. You're having institutional investors now that the liquidity is growing, coming in, and a lot of those larger players that maybe have upwards of 5 or even 6 figures in tau are doing a very different level of due diligence on these subnets before investment than maybe the average individual is. So I think what you're being able to rely on now as you come into Bittensor is kind of some people that have been a little bit battle scarred over the last year, taking their bumps and bruises and lessons. And now the subnets that are at the top are probably, not probably, they're definitely more vetted than they were, when we launched a year ago. So the easy sort of like the ability to select a quality subnet is becoming, I think, easier and easier. And the fun, like the best part about it is you get to play VC, and you don't have to put up $1 million to like invest in something. There's no minimum. You can put $5 or whatever. You could put $100 in it doesn't matter. You don't even have to you could put 0.1, 0.01 tau. It gives everybody the chance to be one of these people that go into these rooms with startups all the time and try and like suss out, which 1 of 10 or 1 of 20 is going to be the unicorn, and then put a bunch of money on it or spread it all around or whatever. And you get to now do the same thing with your funds, and It's a way more fun way to invest your money, which with much higher upside, that honestly, previous to Bittensor, the average person had zero ability to expose themselves to expose their financial future to these heights that are capable when you invest in something like an early stage pre-public company. And so Bittensor has really opened the door now to not just like your average crypto investor, but through Tau.com app and everything else that's being built, to just the average person to come in and make some investments that were not possible just 2-3 years ago. It's awesome. It's one of the like kind of I think, appreciated things of Bittensor is the openness of the investment kind of landscape, and the ability for anybody to come in now, and all the different on ramps that we have, and the ability to swap from all these different crypto projects for people that are already involved, and the ability to come in with Apple Pay and put your money in. Like it's all becoming democratized, and the access to the intelligence within these individuals that are leading these subnets is really the true unlock for Bittensor. I still feel bad, not bad. I feel like guilty, or like maybe I wonder if I should even be able to buy this alpha, because this guy's like working so hard on this subnet, like, and I can like hitch my wagon to his thing, and he doesn't know me, but like you can, and that's kind of the contract that you agree to when you come in and you build a subnet on Bittensor. You don't always know the people that are buying and selling your alpha, of course, and you can kind of retain that anonymity as an investor. Or you can go on X and start talking about everything you swap into. But it feels kind of funny because it's not necessarily, like you said, it's not necessarily a company that you're investing in. It's really you're investing primarily in the abilities of the founder, or the abilities of the leader of that subnet to deliver on its development arc.
Absolutely, and that's something that's always the exciting part of this, is that you are investing in a different class of business that was previously unavailable to the average person, and that does come with some additional sort of requirements for like how you should be exploring these subnets. Like, don't think of them as Tesla and Microsoft. Think of them as like these are small teams that are building really fast moving startups, and you get to play VC, you get to play angel investor. And I think you'll find that when you invest in people, you'll get better returns in the long run than investing in, a single piece of code. And I think that's where the most successful subnets to date have come from, and that's where the most successful subnets will continue to come from, is for the people that have that just undeniable drive towards their mission. But I think that's a great spot to end it here. This has been a good discussion on just kind of where we want subnets to go, and governance, and and social aspects of subnets and everything. It's been an interesting conversation, Keith.
Yeah, it's a fun one.
Awesome. Well, everybody, this has been the Carrot and the Stick podcast with your hosts, Garrett and Keith. We'll see you the next time. Bye.
Bye, everybody.